When you think of advanced yoga, you might think of a handstand or some other twisty inverted pose. But according to my guest today, Sarah Ezrin, the most advanced yoga is actually parenting. Yeah, bedtime battles, teen eye rolls, the whole messy ride. And get this, now, a few years after writing her book, The Yoga of Parenting, Sarah says she'd evolved that idea even further. And I have to say, I like where she's going with this. Stick around because this conversation is about to flip the way you think about parenting. No yoga mat required. Hello, my friend, and welcome to the Belong Wellness Podcast. I am your host, Jessica Long. I am a health coach specializing in perimenopause, a longtime fitness instructor, mama of two littles, and a wife. If you are a midlife woman wondering what the actual F is going on with your hormones, your emotions, your relationships, your career, and your life in general, then you belong here. Join me each week as I share my own personal stories of how I navigate this wild stage of life. I also bring in experts and fellow badass midlifers to share their incredible stories of career pivots, managing relationships, parenting, living a healthy lifestyle, and much more. So listen, if midlife has you feeling like you're just not yourself anymore and alone in the chaos, this podcast is for you. Grab your giant water bottle, snap on your weighted vest, and let's get to it. So I, for one, am looking very forward to understanding how the principles of yoga can apply to parenting and help me be a better parent. So I've brought on the woman who wrote the book about it. Sarah, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Jessica. I feel like we met in a yoga class, right? Like we'd known each other through social, but we met in person. So we had a parasocial relationship where I was like, I love this woman. I need to be friends with her. But then it was in a yoga class that I think that you and I finally got to meet in person. So I am very honored to be here. I appreciate you. And I love the conversations you've been having.
Thank you so much. Well, this is going to be another really good one, I can tell. So you wrote a book called The Yoga of Parenting, 10 yoga-based practices to help you stay grounded, connect with your kids, and be kind to yourself. And I was just telling you before we hit record that I listened to your book and you read it so well. You sound better than the professionals that I listen to. Your voice is so soothing. It just sounds like a friend talking to me. It's so easy to listen to. So brava to you. But for someone who's like, wait a minute, are you talking downward dog and tree pose? Like, what on earth does that have to do with parenting? Can you tell us what the yoga of parenting means?
Yeah, and it's a common misconception, and I even still fall for it sometimes myself, where I'll be like, oh, I didn't do any yoga today, even though my wiser self knows, okay, yoga is not the poses. But what we have been introduced to in the West, what has been commoditized and popularized, is the physical practice, right? It is the physical poses. It became a whole industry. I just was writing an article right now for Yoga Journal, and we were researching when the term yoga industry first started being used, which was 2002. And it really blew up into this whole wellness, right? It was a whole scene. You must wear the outfits and you must make the shapes with your body. And most likely you were able-bodied and thin and, a woman. And it was very much, we were being sold this idea of what yoga should be. But when we look at the research and we look at the origin texts and we actually study the practice, we realize that the physical poses, I often will say it's like a fingernail on the body that is yoga. Yoga itself as a word means connection, and it was any contemplative practice that was helping you either connect closely to yourself, to another, as in your group community, or to higher power, whatever you believe in. That was yoga, and it came out through ritual. We do rituals every day, right? Washing our face and brushing our teeth. So it's certain rituals for welcoming the day. It came up through mantra, which are sacred utterances. It was taught through prayer, actually getting down on your knees and connecting to higher power. It was taught through sangha, which is community. So it's all these aspects that we do already, that is our daily lives, actually count as yoga. And so looking at it from that lens, we realize, oh my goodness, parenting is a spiritual practice too. I mean, maybe it's at the utmost, some would argue. And then so it's, yes, is it down dog? Sure. But it's also regulating yourself when your child is having a meltdown. It's also being conscious enough to know, oh, this is my stuff coming up, and not having to do with what's actually in front of me.
Well, I think you're exactly right. I think in our current culture, so many of us think of it as just the asanas, the poses. And even when we go practice and take classes at studios, a lot of times, it depends on your teacher, of course, but a lot of times you can take a class and never hear about any of the actual principles that are yoga. And so it's no wonder that that's being missed. But there's actually all of these principles that yoga is really, truly all about. And before we jump into those, though, I did want to bring up something that you said in your book that I just thought was so funny and so true. Knowing that you've been practicing yoga, the physical practice of it, at least since you were like in your 20s, a long time. And I remember seeing some photos of you that you've probably shared on your socials in like wild, twisted, crazy poses, like things I could never even imagine getting into. And you say the most advanced yoga I've ever done is parenting. So tell us what you mean by that.
But it's so funny because when I wrote the book, my second was still a baby. And now I have a 3 and a 5-year-old. And I want to write a revised book that is the yoga of co-parenting or the yoga of being in a relationship while you're parenting. I think that's harder.
Oh my God, I totally agree.
That is much harder. Now, like at first I was like, oh yes, it's the parenting thing. But the truth is it's relationships, right? It's just relationships. So whether it is a relationship with your partner or a relationship with someone that maybe you're not partnered with anymore, but you're co-parenting, or a relationship, we were talking about our parents earlier, they really are all different yoga practices. And relationships are hard as, human beings that are multifaceted, and we have all of our own wants and needs, and then we're being conditioned from the outside of like what we should be wanting and needing, and then you're living with these other human beings and what they want and need. And so I would still say, yes, it is still a very advanced practice to be connected with our kids from a place of presence and honesty, no matter what they are throwing at us. It's hard. It's very hard.
Please write that book, The Yoga of Co-Parenting. I will be the first one to read it. I need that.
Yeah, they were like, let's do a series, The Yoga of Relationships. Yeah, we all need it. But the beauty of yoga, like the idea of its connection, right? It's connection. That's the through line. So
I thought about that when you mentioned that in the book, because when I think about connection with my children, my partner, myself, I always think of presence and bringing mind, body, and spirit all to the same place at the same time, which for me personally is incredibly challenging. Our minds are great time travelers. They spend time in the past. They love trying to predict the future. But bringing it all together in the same place, that's when I personally feel truly connected. And I did have a question for you about when I did 200-hour yoga teacher training. They tell us the definition of yoga is the calming of the fluctuations of the mind. And so how do you get connection from that? And I was thinking like, I get it because to me, connection is about presence and calming the fluctuations of the mind is about presence. But I did want to ask you, like, how did you get to those two definitions?
Yeah, so the word itself, the Sanskrit word yoga, comes from the root word yuj, which is Y-U-J, which is all about connection and union. So different from the English language, in the Sanskrit language, there's one word that has many meanings. It's like a cluster of different things that it means. And yoga, like lowercase y yoga, means a marriage. It means an astrological conjunction, when like the stars are lining up. It means a mathematical sum. It even sometimes is used as a term to explain when people used to put the arrows into the bowstring and that connection of that, right? That itself, that yoking together was yoga. And also the yoke of like people would talk about with oxen or large animals when you would yoke them together to till the field. So the word itself, the basis of the root of the word is connection and meaning. What you're talking about, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which is the second Yoga Sutra, which Patanjali also, the man that wrote that, if it was a man, there's like a lot of theories that like maybe it was like Shakespeare where it was like a lot of people, maybe some of them may have been women. I don't know, we don't know, but that was published or at least started to be shared because everything was shared through like repetition and memorization, like 200 AD, right? Yoga had been being practiced well before that. The Vedas, which are the original scripts of yoga, are being dated to around 1500 BC. So we're talking 2,000 years later. this text came through, which was this amazing text that, by the way, everyone should read some transliteration of, because it's like, how are you going to apply this to your daily life? How are householders, people that are choosing to raise a family, be in relationships, how are you going to practice the yoga in your life? So then in that book, it explains, okay, now is the time for yoga, meaning now we begin to practice. Yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind.
Got it.
Sorry,
Okay.
I don't know if anybody's interested in that, but
Well, I am.
yeah.
I like to get technical sometimes. So you bring up a bunch of the principles of yoga throughout your book. And I like that you use a pose as an example to illustrate this. And then you talk about how it applies to parenting. And so one of these principles was the balance of softness and strength. And we talked about that in my daily method training. We used to talk about the effort and ease. And same concept. And so you give Warrior 2 as an example of this. Get into the pose and then clench every muscle in your body and squeeze it as hard as you can. And notice how that feels when you hold the pose that way. And then on the other side, be really loosey-goosey with it, like wet spaghetti. So like you can almost barely hold the pose. And then notice how that feels. And notice that neither one of these is optimal, that you have to strike a balance between the strength and the softness. And I loved that example in the asana. And for me, it's really easy to see. But then how does this apply to parenting?
So the explanation was Sthira Sukha Asanam. So the poses should be soft and strong, right? It's always, there's often this, everything is described in polarities, and you're always trying to find that middle balance. Well, yes, it was first referenced to the physical postures in like the example of Warrior 2. But if we think about this from the parenting lens, and particularly different styles of parenting, like authoritarian parenting, authoritative parenting, permissive parenting, neglectful parenting, that is the same spectrum that we're talking about as far as the amount of connection that there is or the amount of rules and limitations that there are. In other words, it's actually like an axis, right? Because there's, you have your connection and then you have your limitations. So you can have a parenting style that is very strong on the limits and very strong on the connection. You can have a parenting style that's very strong on the limits and very little on the connection. That's that authoritarian, right? And you can imagine a lot of rules, not a lot of connection, how that can then translate into future. Permissive is there's tons of connection, but very little rules, like none, right? And also there it may seem and feel easy and loose in the moment, but a lot of those kids actually have more challenges down the road because they didn't have that container. Neglectful, unfortunately, doesn't fall. It's like no limits, no connection, right? There's just no connection. But as mentioned, that very first one is finding the balance between having a strong set of limits and a strong amount of connection. And it's not too much on either side. It's that perfect balance between the two of them. That amount of boundaries can be, at least what the research is showing right now, is like that is how kids grow up feeling the most safe. There is an understanding of the rules, so they're better able to interact in social situations afterwards. They have more regulated moods because they've internalized the love of their parents, even though they may still have a somewhat strict household. To me, I always think of those like axes, and where in the middle are we falling? Boundaries is a big one. Boundaries and parenting styles.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think this pops up for me so much. I remember hearing like when my kids were little and all the books and podcasts I was listening to were talking about how kids are looking for the boundary. So they're pushing, and they want to know where it is. Just because they're pushing doesn't mean they don't want a boundary or they shouldn't have one. It means they need to know where it is. So they, again, like you said, there's a container and they can kind of feel the container around them and know that that's the safety container, and then pushing past that pushes them out of safety. And so they're looking for that. And I also think about this too, which I now have a 7-year-old, and boy, that back talk starts way earlier than I thought it was going to. I mean, he talks like he's 17 and I'm like, what? I'm not ready. And I think I noticed too, if I'm too strong in my approach with him, it totally backfires and I get a fight or flight response back from him. And it starts to feel like antagonistic. And so I'm always looking for that balance of like, well, he needs to know like it's not okay to say that or talk like that or use that tone. But he also needs to know that I love him even when he does that. Because when he feels that love, that's when the behavior stops.
So conscious parenting, gentle parenting, there's this movement towards allowing our children to have their feelings and holding the space for them to have their feelings. But then there's a lot of misinterpretation that because we're doing that, we're not instilling rules and we're not setting limits. So it's been confused with this permissive parenting style, which it's a lot of connection. It's like, yes, I hear you, I understand, but there are not a lot of rules and containers within there. And I sometimes wonder because, again, everything's a spectrum. You're like constantly toggling back and forth. But even with my own kids, when I'm holding the space for them to have their feelings, where is it appropriate for me to be like, okay, this is the container? Like, are they overwhelmed by feeling these feelings? Am I doing them a disservice of letting them sit in the feelings? Or how do I provide the proper container so that they can feel safe to bounce around the room or do whatever it is that they need to, but then also know like, okay, mama's got you. And I'm constantly kind of like playing against that because the emotions can be so big, right? And mine are 3 and 6, 3.5 and 6. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be like, stop crying, like what they would tell us in the 80s. I wouldn't do that style. But I do sometimes wonder, I'm like, should I make it more of a container for them? Or is it doing them a disservice, letting them be in that connection? I don't know. I mean, it's nothing that I think we're all figuring it out, and our kids are very different, obviously. But yeah, it's something that I've been thinking about in that terms is like, well, sometimes we do need to be a little bit like, we're the steady leader, right? Is what Dr. Becky calls it, or sturdy leader. So you do kind of need to be like, you're allowed to have these feelings. You're not allowed to talk to me that way. And finding that balance, it's hard.
It's really hard, but being aware of that spectrum, or even that there is this softness and strength, and trying to find our right position on it, which isn't going to be the same in every case either, right? Like you said, they're different every day, every instance, every feeling is different. So it's just constantly working on that sliding scale to see like which one's going to work best for that particular day and that particular emotion. But even just being aware of that concept, I think really helps, because it just reminds me like, oh, if I'm getting the fight or flight response from him, I need to back it off a little bit. I need to soften. He needs to see the softer side, and that's going to make him feel safe, which will calm his nervous system and get us all where we want to get.
And like back to the yoga real quick, I just want to point out, like, you had connection there in so many ways, right? You have connection to him and you're perceiving his feelings and his nervous system in that moment, but you're also staying connected to yourself. And what are you feeling in this moment and what's coming up for you? Like, think about, and we all do it because we all are tired and everybody is under supported. But those days where we're exhausted and we're just like, blah, whatever happens, and then they're responding, and then there's no space between that. Like, that example is evidence of like, that's a beautiful yoga practice to me. You slowed it down. You're paying attention to what's going on for him as well as what's going on for you. You're staying connected to both of you. That's the yoga of parenting right there.
So I was using yoga and parenting and didn't even know it.
Exactly. That's what the book, I hope is encouraging for most people. It's like, we don't need to change anything or do anything different. You're already doing it. Let's slow it down and start to recognize those moments.
And give us a framework to think about it in, and just be more aware that that's what we're doing. And it gives us language to it. And then to me, it just reminds me like, oh, right, the strong, soft, like it just gives me something to think of and words to use to describe it, which for me is super helpful. And it just reminds me to do that in the moment. And another one that you talk about is non-attachment to the outcome, which we hear about all the time in yoga. And I love that I think you used handstand as the example in this one, trying to nail that perfect handstand in the center of the room without needing the wall, and how being attached to that outcome is a disservice to yourself in so many ways. You can tire your physical body trying over and over. You could hurt yourself. You can certainly bruise your ego over and over. And you miss the whole point, which is the effort that you're putting in and the play involved in trying and just having fun. And this one, you talk about how we have to let our kids be who they are, and I know this is hard for so many parents. This comes up so much where it's like, well, I played soccer as a kid. I want my kid to play soccer, whatever it is that we're like projecting onto our kids instead of just like letting them be who they are. And you gave this beautiful example of a mother of a child who at a very young age was starting to communicate in their own way that they felt like they were in the wrong body. And this story almost moved me to tears thinking about it from both perspectives, like how incredibly challenging and suffocating it must be to feel like you're in the wrong body, and how incredibly challenging it must be to be a parent of a child 5 years old experiencing this, not knowing, like we're always hearing, oh, everything happens in stages in childhood. So like, you don't know, is this a stage? Is this who this child really is? How do I parent this? And so I just thought that was such an incredible example of what you mean by this. But then I was also thinking, okay, but how can I be unattached to the outcome when there's so many outcomes, just like logistical outcomes that have to happen, right? Like my kid has to get dressed before we leave the house. My kid has to brush their teeth and take care of their oral health. How can I be unattached from those outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, oh my God, the brushing of the teeth. For some reason, we're in an okay groove right now, but the fights on the days that they don't want to do it, I think those are the days that you're like, okay, they're going to get the cavity. Yes, we're going to pay for it at first. But like, can I cuss on here? Because you know that there's like fuck around and find out parenting, right? Like
yes,
fuck around and find
yes.
out. Which is a very harsh way of being like, these are the lived consequences of your actions. So a softer example is they go to school and they forget their water bottle. Well, most of us would be rushing back to school to get their water bottle. And the idea is like, well, the non-attachment piece, maybe they'll figure it out. There's water fountains all around the school. Like, this is good for them to be able to learn that lesson. And hopefully the next day they'll remember their water bottle, right? There's something with that. So you can, with the getting dressed, of course, we have to function in the world, right? And this is, I think, another really cool thing from yoga and especially the Vedas, which are those original texts, which is the different stages of life that we're in. And from 12 to 25 or 12 to 20, obviously the ages are different nowadays. That's your studentship stage. That's when you are devoting yourself to studying and learning the texts and doing all the shapes, et cetera, et cetera. But 25 to 45 or 55, that's the householder stage. That's when we are buckling down and we are trying to collect physical wealth, because that is how we're able to propel and perpetuate our dharma. We have to make money. We always think, oh, yoga just means everything should be given away. And no, the spiritual texts say you have to make money to keep a roof over your head, to feed your children. And then later you go into more of that wise retiree phase. And then eventually then you can go and be a renunciate in the forest. But we're not renunciates in the forest, right? Like we chose, and some people, many people, spiritual seekers will go from studentship into renunciation. But 75% of the rest of the community is doing the parenting and has chosen to be the householder. So you are showing up every day. It's actually another spectrum that is talked about, which is one side is working hard and the other side is letting go of the results of that action. It is a spectrum, and you are showing up every day and you are doing your best every day. And we get them dressed, we prepare them, we send them into the world, but then we got to wipe our hands and just trust of what's going to happen. And I think it can be done extremely, where it can become neglectfully, for sure. But that's why you got to be checking in. Like, we're not going to send them to school without any shoes on, but I'm happy to send him in rain boots on a 100-degree day and put extra shoes in his bag and be like, just so you know that you have extra shoes in your bag, but you're the one who wanted to wear the rain boots and the sweatpants. I've got a son who always wants to be dressed for winter, regardless of the temperature outside. And I'm like, okay, I will give you something to help you if you need to, but that's kind of non-attachment to that. Let him wear whatever he's going to wear. And then just like have a backup.
My son wore winter snow boots every day for about 2 years. We just got out of that phase a couple months ago. So I hear you. And I let him. It was fine. Who am I to say no? And he was happy. He didn't care if it was 90 degrees. He didn't complain about being hot. That's what he felt comfortable in. That was his brand. That's how he was expressing himself. And I was like, cool, I'm good with that. I have no attachment to that. So that's one area where it's easier for me to let go. But some of the other ones where it comes to personal hygiene,
Yes,
it's harder. It's harder for me because I don't want them to get the cavity. I don't want them to be in pain. So that one is a little tougher for me. And you're reminding me of The Anxious Generation, which I'm also currently listening to.
Yeah.
And he talks so much about letting your kids play unsupervised. So it's not like you're completely not there, but maybe you're removed. You're not right on top of them. And if there's a quibble, don't jump in immediately. Let them try to resolve it. Or how, they were polling parents of like 10-year-old kids, asking them, would you be comfortable letting your kids play in the front yard by themselves? And the amount of people who said no was really shocking. And so my husband and I are dabbling in letting our 7-year-old and 5-year-old play in the front yard without us hovering over them, and giving them a little bit of that independence that I think is so crucial. I think I'm going off on a tangent here, but some of what you were saying was reminding me of that, and thinking about like, maybe not non-attachment to the outcome as much as like non-attachment just in general, right? Like letting them be and letting them discover the world a little bit on their own.
Yeah. And in order for that to happen, we do have to be kind of hands off, right? Like we do have to leave that space. You have to lengthen the leash out a little bit. I haven't had my boys out front alone yet, but this is encouraging me to do so. But we have cameras. We can look through the window. Like, it is good for them to have that space. But it's not to say that you're like, oh, if they get kidnapped, they get kidnapped. Like, we're not saying that at all. Like, there has to be like practical measures. But that's where it's always a spectrum. That's where it's always both. So you show up and you educate them and you make sure that they know, like, you don't do this. If somebody gets hurt, you come back inside and you check with mom. Like, you do all that work, but then you do have to let them go, right? You do have to send them out into the world. So many of my friends are launching their kids right now for college. It's the same thing. You do the absolute best you can, and then you let it go.
Yeah. And so maybe that's what we're doing now. We're practicing for that letting go. And so that maybe then we'll just feel a little more confident because they've had a little bit of a longer leash to figure out the world on their own before it's time to fly away. I did want to talk about one more principle that you share in this book, or you talk a lot about self-care and just how important that is in helping us parent in the way that we want to parent. And the quote that you shared, I think it was Anne Lamott, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like, the best gift we can give our children is our own healing.
Yes.
And that was like almost like a punch in the solar plexus. Like, oh my God, it's so true. I've been thinking so much about that recently, how our children are the best examples to bring up what our triggers are. And then the question really is, why is that a trigger? Why am I triggered by that? The issue is not the child, or it's not even really their behavior. It's my reaction, my response. And why am I so triggered by that? So parenting to me is just a big opportunity for self-work, self-growth, healing, understanding ourselves, working on that, working to step by step become the best version of me, which to me currently means learning how to regulate my nervous system around those triggers. So tell me a little bit about why, from the yoga of parenting perspective, self-care is important and how that plays out through the yoga lens.
Yeah. So self-care actually is another yoga practice. So alongside the Vedas those were the original like texts of yoga, although everything was transmitted orally in those days. But they're actually also the oldest known texts that are being reproduced of all time. This is like the beginning of civilization, of man as we know it, getting out of the caves and all of that, and towards literature and towards all that. It was all happening in this one place, which was the Indus Valley. And the Vedas were part of that. Well, alongside of the Vedas was Ayurveda was being presented. And Ayurveda is the science of life. And it is learning to live in harmony with nature. So going to bed when the sun goes down, waking up when the sun is rising, eating food that is seasonal, paying attention to your nervous system when you're around other people, taking the time to do different cleansing actions. There's lots of different things like oil massage and different things that you do for gum health and digestion and different breathing exercises, all of them which have now, again, welcome to like capitalist Western world, have been commoditized into something that can be bought, but really are these basic self-care practices that we need to function our most optimally. So when you say, why am I so triggered, right? I think to myself, well, there's a couple of things. Number one is, are we doing self-care? Are we actually practicing self-care and taking care of ourselves? Or are we triggered because we're overstimulated and exhausted and at our wit's end? And maybe the trigger isn't really the trigger. Maybe it's just the sound of someone, like one of my sons makes these super annoying noises. And he's done it his whole life. And that's how I know I'm depleted, because sometimes I'll just let it go. And he's playing with sound. And when I am under supported and overwhelmed, it is like nails on a chalkboard. And that to me is, I'm like, okay, well, this is clearly an indicator that I need some time off somehow, some way. But then there's another type of trigger where it's bringing up something from my past, or he says something to me that's really hurtful. And let's say I am resourced and I have been sleeping well and I have been doing self-care, and then I'm getting triggered. That's a very different trigger to me. So I think with the self-care, it's like, how do we set ourselves up as optimally as possible so that we are showing up with as full of tanks as possible within the systems and within the countries that we live in. But then we can see more truthfully, okay, you know what? He spoke to me in a way that really upset me. That came up for me because I was never able to speak to my parent that way. That's a very different trigger to start to unearth and unpack than screaming at them because they're screaming and making too much noise. Do you know what I mean? So I think with the self-care, it's just filling our tank. You can't pour from an empty cup if our well is dry.
I think that distinction is really important, and I appreciate that, because I'm so much more easily triggered, as my partner is too, when we're depleted in any way, especially like in the sleep way. But for me, it's also just time for myself. If I'm not putting that into my own schedule, and I just feel like I'm constantly giving outward without giving inward, I can get triggered more easily. But can yoga help us for the other type of trigger where we are feeling fully resourced and we're still triggered?
Yeah, 100%. And it comes down to that, like, slowing things down and checking in and being like, where is this response coming from right now? Is this coming from their behavior? Is this coming from my past? It's that slow down way, like we talk about I'm in Al-Anon, the program Al-Anon, and it's like pause. It's that space before you react, the space that allows you to then respond. And doing these kinds of contemplative practices, sitting for 5 minutes a day, meditation has been shown to change our brain and be able to slow down our responses. Breath work can slow the heart rate down. Now, we're not going to become robots that are like, oh, okay, we're not being affected by anything. We are humans. That's why we're being given all of these amazing tools and guides. That's what these books are for. They're like directions, operating instructions, to bring it back to Anne Lamott. But when we do those practices daily, then we will find that we're just a lot more aware of what's going on. And it's not to say you still don't have a hair trigger with certain things, right? It reminds me of our first example that you were sharing. Your son is talking back to you and you're feeling inside, this does not feel good for me right now. But my response is also affecting him right now. Like, that slowed down response to that, like, that's everything. And I know how hard you work, and you do a lot of contemplative practices and work, whether you name the meditation or not, even how you move your body, and all the pelvic floor stuff and all the deeper dives that you do, all the studying is considered yoga. Anyway, that's all building your tank up for that moment where you can be like, okay. And also, the days where we just like our hair triggers, even when we're already resourced, but something really just pushes past, then we can come back to self-compassion a lot more quickly, right? If you're doing these practices where you're connecting to higher power and you're connecting to yourself and you're connecting to other, it's a lot harder to be unkind to ourselves on the other side of when we inevitably act human.
Oh, that's a big one I've been working on for years now. I mean, I think that's the most common theme I was working on with my therapist for the first 4 years I was talking to her. Was I was so hard on myself every time I acted in a way as a parent that I was not proud of. And I mean, it would take me like 48 hours to unravel if I yelled at them. And so trying to understand why I was so upset that I acted that way, and why it took me so long to come off of it, and why I'm so hard on myself has been some of the hardest work I've ever done. But I am happy to say I'm not perfect, but I've come a long way. And I think it is some of the practices that I've started in the last couple years that have helped me, like you said, have more compassion much quicker. Because Another thing I don't want to do is model for my kids that, oh, if you mess up, you should beat yourself up for 48 hours, which then makes me a dick. Because in the whole process of beating myself up, I'm feeling bad about myself. So then I'm acting outwardly in an unkind way. And it just perpetuates the cycle. And I certainly don't want to teach them that. In fact, I want to break that cycle so they don't do that. So that's been the big motivator for me to try to figure this out about myself. So I'm going to wrap up with you, even though I could talk to you forever about this stuff. But for anyone who's listening, that's like, okay, cool. I want to apply yoga principles to parenting. Is there one that you suggest they start with?
Oh, that's a good question. No one's asked me that before.
Yes, a unique question.
I love that. So I think the life force energy piece is huge because I think it's the umbrella to everything else that we're already talking about. So in other words, like energy is our greatest resource and we are doing all these things to deplete it all day long. And again, like I really want to acknowledge that we are in certain places where there are systems working against us. And it's like, no matter what we do, like the school day is always going to end at 3:30, but the work day will, always be considered until 6. So there are certain things where you're going to have to kind of push against that, but paying attention to where you are energetically and what type of exchanges you're having with your kids, what type of exchanges you're having out in the world. You're noticing this is everything we talked about, right? Like, oh, I actually feel full enough where my connections feel valid and I feel grounded enough where I can set limits that are within reason and, natural consequences or whatever. Or I'm on the other end, I'm super depleted. I have zero energy and now I'm just reacting to everyone and everything. So that principle of like energy is my most precious resource. And of course we're going to have to be depleted. Like, if you carried your child in your body, there's going to be a depletion because there's something growing inside of you. We have children. We are in this caretaker space. We are in the householder phase. But what are the choices we can make and what are the things that we can do outside of that where we're constantly managing our energy in a healthy way?
And so one of the key ways to do that is boundaries. So setting boundaries to protect our energy, meaning saying no to things that we don't want to say yes to, taking the time to commit to the practices that make us feel good and fill our cup, even if it means taking time away from our kids and trying to find a way to do that without guilt,
Yes.
but knowing that you will show up as a better version of yourself if you do that. So that can help minimize that guilt. Sarah, besides continuing the series of these books, so the Yoga of Co-Parenting coming up next, everyone, what's next for you?
So I've been deep diving more into maternal mental health. I went back and forth for so long because I wanted to remain inclusive and I wanted to help all parents. But I realized through my own lived experience, just the circumstances in the world right now, that moms need a particular amount of support. And not saying dads don't either, but from my background and what I have to bring, that's where I've been leaning into. So I've been creating different online courses, different yoga challenges, but really using yoga to help improve maternal mental health at all phases and all stages. And just trying to throw some life rafts out there as we're all paddling desperately with our heads trying to stay above water.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So where can everybody find you and learn more about your offerings?
I'm probably most active on Instagram, but I am everywhere. So sarahezrinyoga.com, and you can reach out and send a message. And we have lots of free resources and ebooks and cards and just lots of goodies for the people in our village. And then, of course, on IG.
At Sarah Ezrin Yoga on Instagram.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I'm like, just guess. Google it.
Just find me. I'm there. All right, cool. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And you've definitely given us all something to think about.
Thanks, Jessica.
This conversation got me looking at parenting and my own behavior through a new lens. What about you? Do you think you might think about some of these concepts as you're interacting with your kids later today? Leave a review on Apple or comment on this episode on Spotify. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. And now to wrap up, here are 3 takeaways that I hope you'll carry with you. 1, parenting is connection and action. It's about presence with your kids and with yourself. 2, the sweet spot is somewhere on the spectrum between strong and soft. Boundaries matter, but so does compassion. Kids need both to feel safe. And 3, your energy is your most precious resource. Protect it with self-care and self-compassion so you can parent from a grounded place. Best of luck in your parenting endeavors, and I'll catch you next week.